Welcome back to the Left Library, where we break down political theory to make it accessible to everyone. Today, we're asking a key question: what's your ontology? But don't worry if that word sounds unfamiliar. We're about to explain exactly what it means and how it shapes your view of politics. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer sense of how everybody naturally views the world through different ontological perspectives. In this video, we'll explore the concept of power, which is the core of all political science. Power is about who controls what, how they use it, and who gets left out. But here's the thing: different political thinkers see power in different ways, and we'll help you to figure out which one matches your view of the world. We'll do this by explaining how power is understood through different political perspectives, whether it's realism, where power is all about competition, liberalism and cooperation, or Marxism and class struggle. Each theory gives you a new way of understanding the world, or helping you to understand why people with those ontologies made the decisions that they did. Understanding your view of power, whether you lean towards one of these schools of thought or even combine a few of them, is crucial for understanding the political world around you. Whether it's how governments operate, how social movements push for change, or how ideas shape the laws that we live by. These perspectives help to explain the world. So, which one matches your view? Let's find out. In order to help you figure out how you see power in the world, we'll start by defining power. Then we'll dive into two key concepts: ontology and epistemology. After that, we'll explore the major schools of thought in political science, and by the end, you might just discover which one of these matches your own viewpoint. Power is the ability to influence or control the behaviour of others. In political science, power is at the centre of everything. It's in the laws that governments pass, the wealth that corporations hold, and the ideas that shape public opinion. But depending on how you see the world, power can come from different places: governments, economic systems, or even the way that we talk about ideas. Some theories see power as something that governments or states hold, while others focus on how power is distributed throughout economic systems, class structures, or even gender dynamics. But to really understand these different views, we need to talk about two key concepts: ontology and epistemology. Ontology is a fancy word for how you see the world, what you believe is real. In politics, your ontology shapes how you understand power. Do you think governments are the most important actors? Or maybe you believe that the economy drives everything? Or is it ideas and identities that hold real power? Your ontology is your starting point. If you think governments are at the centre of power, you might align with realism. If you believe power comes from class conflict, you're leaning towards Marxism. If you think ideas shape everything, then you might be drawn to Constructivism. Understanding your ontology helps you to see the world more clearly. Next, let's talk about epistemology. If ontology is about what's real, then epistemology is about how we know what's real. What kind of evidence do you trust to understand power? Do you look at hard data and statistics, or do you focus on historical patterns and cultural analysis? Your epistemology is the toolkit that you use to gather knowledge. If you rely on numbers and patterns, then you're using an empirical approach. If you focus on history and culture to uncover hidden power dynamics, then you're using a critical approach. How you gather knowledge shapes what you believe is true about power. So to recap, we've learned that political science is all about understanding power. Then we covered ontology, how you see the world, and epistemology, how you know what's real. These two concepts are the foundation of the different schools of thought that we're about to explore. Now, it's time to explore the main schools of thought in political science. These are the different ways of thinking about power, each with its own view of what's real in politics and how we should understand it. We'll outline the basic details so that you can see which one resonates with you and how you naturally think about power. If you do want to learn more about each one, then please do drop a comment below and we can make individual videos for each. First up is realism. Realists view the world as a tough, competitive place, where countries or states are the most important players. In this view, every state is out to protect itself and its interests, because there's no global government to enforce rules. Imagine you're playing a game where there are no referees. Everyone in that game is looking out for themselves. That's how realists view the international system. Realists believe that states act within their own self-interest. Their main goal is survival, and to survive they need power, usually military or economic power. Realists think that conflict is inevitable because states are always competing for resources, security, and even influence. Even when countries do cooperate, realists believe they're still looking out for themselves, trying to gain an advantage. A famous example of realist thinking is the Cold War, when the US and the Soviet Union were locked in a tense competition for global influence. Both sides built up massive militaries because each feared that the other would gain too much power. Even though they never went to war directly, their competition shaped global politics for decades. So if you believe that power is all about states competing in a dangerous world, then realism might be your viewpoint. Next, we have liberalism. Liberals believe that even though there's conflict in the world, it's possible for countries to work together and achieve peace. For liberals, power isn't just about military force, it's also about cooperation and diplomacy. International organisations, like the United Nations, and economic interdependence through trade are key to maintaining peace to the liberal. Liberals think that by creating international rules and institutions, we can make the world a more stable and cooperative place. They believe that democracy and free trade lead to peace because democratic countries are less likely to go to war with each other. Trade also makes countries dependent on one another, which gives them an incentive to avoid conflict. A classic example of liberal thinking is the creation of the United Nations after World War II. The idea was that by creating a global institution where countries could resolve disputes, we could prevent further future wars. Liberalism believes that cooperation, international laws, and diplomacy are the keys to reducing conflict. If you believe that power can be shared and that cooperation is the path to peace, you might find yourself aligned with liberalism. Do you see politics as a constant struggle between the rich and the working class? If so, Marxism might resonate with you. Marxists believe that the economy is the foundation of all political power. In their view, the real conflict in society isn't between countries, but between classes. Those who own the means of production, so the factories, the land, and the corporations, versus those who work for them. Marxism argues that in capitalist society, the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, uses its economic power to exploit the working class, the proletariat. The bourgeoisie control the wealth and the resources, and they use that control to maintain power, keeping the working class dependent on them. Marxists believe that real political change comes from a revolution where the working class rise up to overthrow the capitalist system and create a more equal society. A famous example of Marxist ideas in action is the Russian Revolution of 1917, when the working class, led by the Bolsheviks, overthrew the ruling elite of Russia and established a socialist state. For Marxists, this kind of revolution is the only way to break free from the cycles of economic exploitation. If you believe that economic inequality is the root of all political problems and that real change comes from revolution, then Marxism may be your perspective. Feminism isn't just about women's rights. It's a critique of how power is distributed across society. At its core, feminism challenges systems of domination like patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism that oppress not just women, but anyone marginalized by these structures. This view of feminism sees gender as one aspect of a larger system of exploitation. Feminists argue that patriarchy and capitalism work together to reinforce inequality, both in the workplace and in social hierarchies. This isn't just about gender oppression, but also how these structures affect men, non-binary people, and others marginalised by race, class, and economic status. Marxists and social feminists, for example, argue that gender inequality cannot be separated from economic exploitation. They believe that true liberation comes from dismantling not only patriarchy, but also the capitalist system that relies on unpaid or undervalued labour, often done by women, but also people of all genders in precarious positions. Feminism, in this sense, is about transforming society, not just achieving equality within it. From more radical feminist perspectives, liberal feminism, which focuses on achieving gender equality within existing systems, is often critiqued as limited. While liberal feminism often seeks greater representation of women in leadership roles or equal pay for women, it tends to overlook how these issues are tied to the broader structures of exploitation. It argues for inclusion within the current system, but radical feminists see the need to transform the system itself. While many political thinkers focus on states or economics, constructivism takes a different approach. Constructivists believe that power isn't just about material things like armies or wealth, it's about ideas and identities. The way that we think about the world shapes how power works. For constructivists, power is socially constructed, meaning that the beliefs, the values and identities that people and countries hold are what shape their behaviour. For example, the concept of a nation or sovereignty is not a fixed reality. It's something that people have agreed upon over time. By changing the way that people think, for constructivists, you can change how power works. A good example of constructivist ideas is how national identities change over time. Take Germany, for instance. The way Germans see themselves today is very different from how they saw themselves before World War II. That change in identity has shifted Germany's role and behaviour in global politics. So if you believe that power is about shaping ideas, beliefs and identities, and that changing your mind can change politics, then you may be drawn to constructivism. Now let's talk about postcolonialism. This school of thought argues that even though the formal colonial empires ended, the power structures set up by colonisation still deeply affect global and national politics today. The key question here is, how does the history of colonialism shape the way that power is distributed in the world? For post-colonial theorists, political power is still concentrated in the hands of former colonial powers, like the US or Western Europe. They argue that even though many countries are technically independent, the wealthier nations continue to exert power over them economically and culturally. This is called neo-colonialism, where power is maintained not through direct rule, but through economic dependence and cultural dominance. Post-colonialists often point to the unequal relationship between wealthy nations and developing countries as evidence of this ongoing power dynamic. For example, Western corporations often extract resources from former colonies, keeping those countries dependent on the global economic system set by the wealthy nations. Post-colonial thinkers argue that true independence requires breaking free from these neo-colonial relationships. If you believe that global inequality today is rooted in the history of colonization and that power is still concentrated in the hands of former empires, you might align with post-colonialism. Finally, we have post-structuralism. Post-structuralists believe that power isn't something you can point to or hold on to. It's fluid, always shifting, and exists in every interaction that we have. For them, power isn't just in governments or institutions, it's everywhere. It's in the language that we use, in social norms, and in the way that we organise our societies. Post-structuralists like Michael Foucault argue that power isn't just top-down, imposed by rulers or governments. Instead, it's produced through everyday social practices and relationships. Power exists in the way that we talk about things, in our cultural norms, and in the structures that we accept as normal. What's powerful today might not be powerful tomorrow, because power is always being renegotiated. An example of post-structuralist thinking is how political rhetoric can shape what's seen as acceptable or normal. Take how politicians frame immigration. The way they talk about immigrants can either reinforce fear and exclusion or promote inclusion and human rights. Post-structuralists say that power is just it's in the way ideas are communicated and normalised. If you believe that power isn't fixed, but constantly shaped by our language, culture, and everyday actions, then post-structuralism might be the perspective that speaks to you. So, what's your ontology? Do you see power as the struggle between states, classes, or identities? Is it shaped by historical legacies, or by the ideas and norms that we follow every day? Political science helps us understand these different ways of seeing the world, and finding your own viewpoint can help you make sense of the complex world of power and structure your politics. Let us know in the comments which school of thought resonated most with you. And if you enjoyed this journey through political theory, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who may want to learn more. Thank you.